California's a disaster, what they've done in California. They don't do anything. And if you did, you almost would not have forest fires. And you could say in theory, you shouldn't have any forest fires. And we spend billions and billions of dollars a year because people don't clean the forests. And we're going to clean the forests. We're going to start cleaning them. We're going to get rid of dead wood. The environmentalists say, oh no, let it regenerate. It doesn't regenerate. It just sits there and it usually catches fire. And we're going to have a whole new system, and it's called forest management.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast with a twist. We don't just talk about current affairs, we give you ideas for things you can do to make the world we occupy a better place. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith, the good liberal to his bad socialist.
Whatever your political affiliation, you are most welcome.
So long as you get comfy, turn up the volume and help us begin another Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. As we record today's show, the spending review announcements are in full swing, but we're not going to cover them today. Instead, we will digest it all and give you a more detailed, less reactionary take on next week's show with a brilliant economist, Wokey Price.
As is our pattern now, to not go on the day, but to go the week after.
Indeed.
But fear not, we have a bumper crop of other topics to get into. This week, we're covering the LibDems, fresh from the recent successes at the May elections. We'll be looking at what's next for the party of Middle England.
And we're going to cross the Atlantic to discuss the absolute scenes coming out of America.
To help us, we're delighted to be joined by yet another politician making their Quiet Riot debut. It's the Lib Dem MP for Lewis, James McCleary. Welcome, James.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
James, the last Liberal Democrat to be an MP in your seat was Norman Baker, who, after stepping back from frontline politics, resurrected his band, the Reform Club, in which he provides lead vocals. What would you call your band?
Well, obviously, I don't have the extraordinary musical talent of Norman, who's an inspiration to all of us, and still have to say lives in Lewis and is a huge help to me as a new MP. I gave us a little bit of thought. I think probably the best we came up with was the McCleary mandate. We quite liked.
I like that.
Which was quite snappy.
That's good.
But we had lots of things
Liberal
around.
decibels. I thought that was quite good.
That is a good one. I like that.
McCleary and the mandates, I think.
McCleary
and the mandates.
Yeah. That's even better. Yeah. There we go. We're sorted. So if I need a fallback plan, I've got one now. Brilliant.
I'll play drums.
Thanks.
Quiet Riot. In May this year, for the first time ever, the Lib Dems overtook the Tories in the local elections, pushing them into third place. They seized control of the shires. Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Shropshire county councils are now under Lib Dem administration. They are also the largest party on Devonshire, Hertfordshire, Gloucestershire and Wiltshire county councils. But they did miss out on winning any of the mayoral races up for grabs, coming in second to Reform in Hull and East Yorkshire, despite running Hull for the last 3 years. At last year's general election, the party also returned more MPs than ever, and will doubtless be eyeing up some by-election gains as the Parliament continues. And these results show that while the party has long backed a change to the voting system to a more proportionate one, there can be no doubt the party knows how to game the status quo to its advantage, being the only party last year to basically get a seat haul in line with its national vote share. James, you were a councillor long before you were an MP. And how important are local election victories to national success? What infrastructure does it give you?
They play a very important role for us. I mean, the local election success, as you said, I was a councillor. I've been a councillor since 2007 on Lewis District Council and on East Sussex County Council. Liberal Democrats are grassroots campaigners. We build from the bottom up. That's how we work. And we build that base by getting people elected to local councils who can start to build those networks, get those poster sites, get the people who are going to, those absolute troopers we have who stick out the leaflets for us on a voluntary basis. And we build up those little personalities as well, people that feel, hey, look, I know this person in my town or my village and I know they work hard for me, and that's the Lib Dem councillor. And that really translates very effectively when we get to a general election. And indeed, a lot of our new parliamentarians are councillors or have been councillors. We have a very wide local government base in our new intake. I'm certainly not the only one. So again, it's an area that people can test themselves out in the council chamber. They can get used to asking questions, taking parts in debates, being on live streams and having the media paying attention to them. And it's a good dry run for Parliament for
And
some
so
people.
how much does it hurt the Tories and Labour when they're losing local elections in terms of their ability to fight a national election?
I think it's been pretty devastating for the Conservatives. I think we're seeing them being just completely hollowed out. Their activist base has gone. Very recently in Newhaven, where I live, we had a by-election for the district council, and which was one of our seats, which we held with a good percentage of the vote. But the Tories ended up fourth, I think, in the end, and polled 59 votes in the election. That is a seat that has been a marginal or held Conservative seat in very recent memory. So the collapse has been pretty dramatic, and a lot of it is linked to the fact that when you lose all of your councillors, and Lewis District Council has no Conservatives on it at all anymore, you do lose that activist base, because you lose those people who are I guess, invested, because they're the ones who are going to the council meetings and hearing about the debates and getting fired up. And you just lose that completely. So it's really corrosive for a party to start to lose its local government base.
But is there a part of you that looks at other newer parties kind of parachuting into seats and just putting out TikTok videos and getting to 20-odd from nowhere, that thinks maybe that's an old-fashioned view of how you build actually a party base? Or do you think that model will persist, basically?
I think there's always a role for community politics. What we've seen is national swings always have an impact. You see it at the sort of the air war level, the national swing. But Liberal Democrats have shown in the past that by digging in and building these networks in communities, you can really, when things aren't going your way, you can hang in there, as of course we did have to after 2015. And then when things do start to go your way a bit better, or perhaps your opponents aren't doing so well, that can build momentum quickly. But there's definitely a big role and a growing role for modern sort of social media and different communications techniques. I use Facebook Live. I do Facebook Lives as an MP. I used to do it as leader of the council when I was council leader in Lewis. Those sorts of modern communication methods are really important, particularly with people, mobile devices and people consuming things differently. But I think there's always going to be a role for the humble bit of paper through the door.
I'm much more likely to open a bit of post than I am an email, because it's a novelty. I don't really get much through the letterbox anymore. And I'm like, a local party's dropped a leaflet through. I'll have a read.
That's the saddest thing
Whereas
I've ever heard
I've got
in my
something
life.
like 10,000 unread emails in my various different inboxes at the moment. So I think, there is room for both.
There is, and we see it in in the general election. We did a little handwritten note that we'd scanned and sent to everybody. And the amount of feedback we got from that in a little blue envelope, it was just something different, and people sort of really noticed it, and they thought it was really nice. It was my handwriting, and you'd taken the time to do that. So there's definitely something about particularly letters, direct mail, things that are addressed to you personally, which makes a huge difference as opposed to that kind of mass consumption TikTok.
And what's the time lag, James, in terms, because as you mentioned, after the coalition years, actually during the coalition years, you took quite a battering in local government, but you kind of rebuilt. Is there a time frame within which you need to start coming back? Otherwise, the damage becomes sort of permanent, because the Conservatives have lost loads of seats right now, but presumably those people will still be involved in their local party. They don't all instantly disappear.
The existential threat the Conservatives are facing is that it's one thing if you lose loads of seats and those people are sort of just sitting there demotivated, and then a new leader comes along and remotivates them and reactivates them. The problem is if you lose them to someone else, that's your point of no return. And what the Conservatives are seeing, and we're seeing it, say locally, is Reform UK are just hoovering up these disillusioned former Conservatives. We're seeing a lot of defections happening around the country with people who are seeing, perhaps in their areas, the writing on the wall that they're not going to be able to hold their seat as a Conservative. And if when that starts to happen, it's very hard to find a way back, because those people are quite unusual. Most people don't want to get actively involved in politics. And so, when they start losing all those people to another party, there can be nowhere back for you, potentially.
It's almost like the great replacement theory.
My favourite topic then, and I think one of yours, James, Europe. The Lib Dems, known for being avid pro-Europeans, and you have the Europe brief. Charles Kennedy, the late Charles Kennedy, once addressed the party conference, and he warned that while Europe was very much in the DNA of the party, that for too long that stood for do not acknowledge. And he said that he himself was guilty, along with pressure from the campaigns department, of just being afraid to, or actively choosing not to raise it on the doorstep. Where is the party on that tension now as it tries to pick up seats in areas like Cornwall that voted to leave versus the real opportunity on the national stage to say, hey, Labour, all right, nice start, but nowhere near enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got ourselves in quite a strong position on this. We're quite comfortable where we are right now. We've been calling, as you know, for a customs union with the European Union as a big step forward to support British business and break down trade barriers. I visited the Port of Dover just last week to see the challenges they're facing with the new EES system that's coming in, or supposed to come in later this year, which will, of course, affect border checks enormously. And I think we've seen that pressure has started to pay off. I've been calling for a youth mobility scheme, or youth experience scheme, as I believe they're now calling it.
No, even Nick Thomason has called it a YMS.
Oh, did he? Did he? Okay, good.
They can't get their own heads around it. None of the rest of us should bother.
And, that went from a definite no to a we can probably do that now. So, we see part of our role is to really cajole the government, press them on these kind of pragmatic things. Honestly, it's not something that I get in my mailbag a huge amount, unless it's in national media, like it was with the recent negotiations. So I think we're much more confident talking about it. And obviously we know that a lot of people have now concluded that leaving the European Union has not been a beneficial thing to the UK.
Certainly not for Cornwall.
Certainly not for Cornwall. And in those sorts of places as well, you're looking at people like farming communities. I've got a lot of farmers in my constituency who are just, pragmatic people who thought this might help. It clearly hasn't helped. And so they're pragmatic people are saying, actually, we probably need to do something different now. And that's a completely reasonable position to take. And I think we're quite in tune with that at the moment.
I need to challenge you on a question that we also put to the Greens. So, James, for your benefit, after the local elections, we wanted to speak to LibDems, Greens, Labour, do the whole analysis. Again, it's about a tension between a national position and then the perception of how party members and elected representatives behave in a local area. And on the day of the spending review, more topical than ever, balancing national policy around homes and infrastructure with local residents being opposed to schemes. And there is, I think, now quite a widely held view, particularly among younger voters, that the Lib Dems talk a good talk on housing, but tend to block development at the local level. One example, I think, is HS2, where, it has long been national party policy to support high-speed rail infrastructure. Lib Dem MPs and constituencies affected very, very vociferously against. When it comes to that sort of tension, rather than the geopolitical Europe stuff, how does the party handle that, and could it be doing it better?
It's always going to be a tension in any party, and we've seen Conservative MPs doing the same thing, and indeed this Labour administration has had their own MPs who, of course, have very much been out of line with their national narrative around things. On house building, I'm quite proud of my record. When I was leader of Lewis District Council, we started building council houses for the first time in a generation, and indeed there are some on my road. I'm somebody who very much welcomes that approach, but we have a planning system that excludes local people and doesn't really encourage real consultation. And it means that you end up with developers, councils and residents being put into this confrontational position, and councillors get put in an almost impossible position where they've got to try and balance all these things off together. And there are bad developments. And I think, therefore, sometimes the language that comes out of government ministers in this government, that anybody who thinks that housing development in a place is a bad idea is by definition a NIMBY, I think is incredibly unfair. There are
reductive.
There are bad developments out there, and people have every right to oppose them. There are definitely going to be cases where the national policy isn't going to marry up with local circumstances, but I think that's quite reasonable. And at the end of the day, MPs' jobs, primarily, in my view, is to represent their constituents. And, if there is something that's being done to your constituency, which is a negative thing, then it's your job to stand up for them at the end of the day. And if that means you're out of line with your national party policy, then so be it.
I guess where it becomes more difficult is in the more woolly notion of representing possible future constituents, which is the systemic problem in the planning system, isn't it? That the people who are already there and established have a stake, but the people who might be looking for a place to live in are not there. They're not represented, and it's down to you actually to represent those fictional, possible young future home buyers wanting to come to your area. So how do you do that?
Like my own kids, for instance. Yeah. I mean, yes, and that's absolutely right. I think one of the biggest tensions we have right now, and something I've spoken about repeatedly in terms of house building, is that you're right, you have these stakeholders who are there already. And you take where I live, we have one east-west road that's just a traffic jam. I had raised it in the House of Commons just the other day, the A259, it's just a traffic jam. And they're saying, OK, well, we're going to build another 1,000 houses in the area. Well, it's completely reasonable for people to turn around and go, well, you can't put another 1,000 houses worth of cars onto this road. You've got to give us some more infrastructure to support this. And I think we've got to do better at doing a deal with people and saying, actually, look, your school's oversubscribed, or you can't get an appointment at the GP surgery. So, right, we're going to provide the infrastructure for you to make your life better. Quid pro quo here is we're going to build 300 houses as well, or whatever it is. And I don't think we're doing that first, but we're just saying to people, take the houses, the stuff will come, build it and they will come, it's like magically this other stuff, and it's not appearing. We're seeing our roads grind into a hole, our trains are not being updated, we've got sewage in our rivers, and people are just sort of saying, come on, you can't just keep building houses and not giving us anything to go with them. And I think that's got to be part of the deal.
Managing population growth has been a failure of successive governments and has in no small part fueled anti-migration sentiment in the UK, whether it's internal migration, the DFLs, the down from Londons, as I'm sure you get quite a few of in your neck of the woods, or people coming from abroad. I guess to Alex's question about future voters, what reasons do young people have to vote Lib Dem at the moment?
There's always a good reason to vote Liberal if you're young, because young people are liberal, and we represent, Liberals. If we're doing our job well, we represent the future, we represent being modern, and that's something that's always attracted. That's something that attracted me to the party when I was.
How old were you when you joined?
About 23, 24 years old.
That's not too embarrassing.
I wasn't a young activist. I wasn't actually very involved in politics at all until I was a postgraduate, actually. And I've done 2 degrees in politics by then, so I thought I should probably show some active interest in this now. For us, we're sort of saying that we're talking about things that should attract young people. We're talking about mobility. We're talking about saying to people, you should be able to, the European Union is a very important part of this, in my view. You should have these opportunities to travel and work and start your life or continue your life wherever you want to do it. And there's also a lot around Lib Dems being the only people who are really been speaking out on Gaza recently. We've been much more strong on it than anybody else. We've spoken out on some of the issues that people have been talking about in terms of identity politics in a way that others haven't. So I think there are lots of reasons that people, but ultimately young people want what older people want, which is a good job, to be able to buy a house and school for their kids if they have them.
Now, if the Greens were listening, they'd say, we've been very noisy about Gaza and trans rights and Europe and all of those things. And we do see in the polling data that they are really attracting a sizable chunk of young voters in urban areas, certainly. There are urban seats that the Lib Dems will be eyeing up at the next election for sure. But I think more of them that are potential gains are probably in suburban and rural areas where there are fewer young people, I suppose. But the ones that are there do need somebody to vote for. And I really don't want it to be Reform UK, who do seem to be now not only hoovering up younger men, but a worryingly large number of younger women as well. I think getting back to the point Alex raised at the beginning about how do you reach these people, they are not the primary person at the address. They're not going to be the first named person on the electoral roll to receive the literature that's coming through. And I don't necessarily see the Lib Dems building that kind of peer-to-peer communication style that I think young people would be more attracted to. Is that the sort of thing you'd like to see the party focusing on?
Yeah, and obviously I'm not an ardent follower of Ed's TikTok then, which I believe is hugely popular. Yeah, you're right. And there's different types of communication for different generations. I mean, I was talking about this just yesterday because we had the data bill in Parliament, and we're looking at, I look at my own kids and the way that they're growing up with the sort of digital tools around them and platforms like YouTube, which are a very, very big part of their lives, even at a very young age. And, we do have to be thinking about how people are absorbing and digesting information differently.
Did you know that the UK has the highest per capita minutes of watching YouTube of any country in the world?
That might be driven by my son.
And me.
Yeah, he might be the leading cause. But it doesn't surprise me. It's incredibly popular and very addictive.
But I think it's because we can't afford to go out.
Yeah, well,
I think it is so much of it is a cost of living crisis. I can barely afford a bottle of wine at a restaurant.
It's astonishing how expensive.
So people just sit at home watching free content on YouTube because to step outside the front door costs you 30 quid before you've even got a starter and a beer.
And that's if you're fortunate enough to live in somewhere like London where you've got restaurants within walking distance.
Yeah.
So you got to drive or get a train,
Yeah.
you're adding costs on top of that. And then in our case, you're looking at childcare as well, which is not cheap. So, all of it adds up and you suddenly think, oh, goodness, this is going to cost us £200-300 just for a night out. This is just, we can't really sustain that. So you're right. And I think, but it also leads to the sort of growth of things like streaming platforms and people spending more time at home watching, movies and Netflix and all the rest of it. So perhaps a changing lifestyle, and probably COVID had some contribution to that too, which is something we probably don't talk about enough, to be perfectly honest.
Quiet riot. Quiet riot. Let's talk a little bit about the spending review then. What would the Lib Dems prioritise in order to bring down the cost of living, which is clearly going to maintain its pole position in voters' minds as the thing they're going to be deciding on when they go to the ballot box between now and the next election?
Yeah, we've been talking a fair bit. We've had some successes on this already. I mean, my colleague Max Wilkinson introduced his private members bill, Sunshine Bill, which was for solar panels on the roofs of all new build houses, which has been adopted by the government, which was a fantastic success for him. And that's the sort of thing we can do that's pragmatic in terms of, aiding our transition to net zero, but also bringing down people's energy bills, quite frankly, by integrating renewable energy into people's homes. On top of that, we've also been calling for funds to retrofit people's homes, better insulation. These are the sorts of things that actually have a substantive and material impact on people's day-to-day lives. I think, we've also obviously been talking, not to keep going back to it, but obviously we've talked about a customs union and, aligning ourselves with the European Union more closely to bring down the cost of moving things across the border, which would bring down, hopefully, food prices to some extent and would affect. And the government's SPS deal may well do that, and we're pressing them at the moment.
But we need it for all industrial sectors, because if we're going to build all these new council homes, it'd be nice if the materials that we have to import didn't have an artificial levy on top of them induced by trade barriers at the border.
Precisely. And when you're in an unstable world where you've got a very unstable individual in the White House who's actively attacking other countries, including our own, you do need to give yourself as many sort of friends as possible, as strong as possible that you can. I mean, we've also talked about other things. We'd levy money from a digital services tax. We'd increase that to 10%, which would generate a lot of money, which would allow us to invest in things, but also not necessarily do some of the quite indefensible things the government are doing, potentially around disability payments, their refusal to scrap the two-child benefit cap, which I, as somebody who's campaigns a lot in early years, I think is frankly criminal and is one of the worst policies that's ever been instituted in this country. And hopefully they'll get there eventually, but we need to look at how we're going to achieve that. So there's quite a few different ways that we've spoken about helping people with the cost of living, but ultimately the one thing the government is right about, I don't think they've gone about achieving it the right way, is that ultimately we need growth in the economy. That's actually how you help people to afford things. And what we've actually seen is the cost of living going up and wages stagnating, and that's actually creating this huge void, which is not happening elsewhere.
Quiet riot.
Today's the spending review. Like we said, we will do our usual thing of going into it in depth next week, having read the actual thing. Quite a novel approach among political podcasts, I think. But having seen the outline of it, you've just come from the House of Commons, what are your kind of headlines? Give me one thing you really like about it and one thing you really don't like about it.
I can give you a couple of things I like about it. I mean, I think it's good that they're investing in the NHS. It's desperately needed. And I think it's good that they're increasing defence spending. We have to do it. So, these things for me are good things. The downsides of it were, obviously we're already seeing some of the numbers being contested in there. I believe the police are not at all happy about the claims about increased spending on them. And I think, there'll be a lot in the detail. And when you go into it in detail, I think there's going to be a lot of ways to criticise it. And my main criticism has been as a local MP so far. I'm a Sussex MP, and the government have, frankly, completely ignored the southeast of England and treated us as if we don't have any problems that need fixing, which is just completely unfair and untrue. And I think that it's one of the things we suffer from. We benefit from our proximity to London, but we also suffer from it because we get lumped in with London all the time. And it means that quite often, they refer to London South East all the time as if it's one area. We have no rural bus services, or we desperately need investment in our local schools and our GPs. And we're hearing about these great projects around the country, and they sound wonderful. but there's nothing for us, and it makes me quite angry as a Southeast MP to feel that we're being so completely ignored, as if we don't matter. And that was quite hard to hear today from the Chancellor, who just seemed to me merrily excluding the Southeast completely from the spending.
Yeah, I mean, in defence of London, I would say that London suffers from the same thing. You know, like, not all London is populated by super rich people just on a diet of caviar, throwing a Platinum American Express at their nanny.
And it adds such a huge amount to the coffers in terms of tax receipts and tourist receipts, and it does act as a catalyst. It's not a drain.
Yeah, I mean, it's wealth distribution. Wealth distribution is uneven everywhere, and that is the root of the problem in every area.
Absolutely.
James, I'd like to turn to matters constitutional.
Okay.
Oh.
UKIP, Brexit Party, Reform UK were all notionally, at least, in favour of a change to the voting system, which now looks to be a little more than naked opportunism, because they kind of backed off that position since their poll ratings have soared. And the Lib Dems have kind of done the opposite and argued for PR, despite faring much better than Reform under first past the post last year. It is highly unlikely that the current Labour government are going to back PR, but there are rumours of an elections bill. I believe it's now been pushed back to the autumn. We're not even going to see a statement pre-recess because Cabinet Office not keen to have that argument at the moment. What constitutional changes other than the voting system would Lib Dems hope might be included in such a review of constitutional matters?
Yeah, I mean, this is there's a few things that are Lib Dem catnip in the world, and constitutional reform is definitely one of those. We've been advocating votes at 16, of course, which is something we hope the government, when Labour committed to it in their manifesto, and we've pressed them on it, and they keep saying they're going to do it, but they haven't done it yet. We are still very committed to electoral reform. I mean, a lot of people gave us this I got a lot of people kind of giving me a sort of sniffy, oh, look, now that you've succeeded under a first past the post system, clearly you're all going to just abandon that. But it's proportional representation goes to the sort of core values of being a liberal. It's all about sort of building collaborative, cooperative politics, and actually that's what a PR system lends itself to, and of course does in other countries in Europe where we see coalitions as normal, whereas of course here we've only had one, and it was it didn't go brilliantly for us. And so we're very committed to that. We've spoken about that for some time. I would like to also see things around, personally, I think the voter ID thing is hugely damaging and excluding for people, and I think it has done a lot of harm. We don't have a big problem with voter or electoral fraud in this country. It's an absolute hammer to crack a nut, and it was clearly designed to exclude people who the Conservatives thought were less likely to vote for them. Hopefully we'll see some ambition in that area from Labour, but we haven't seen, as you said, no bill yet, and it's unclear what they're going to prioritise.
We like to give our listeners a call to action. James, is there anything you'd like them to know about or do that is of particular interest to you?
Great opportunities to raise a fantastic woman locally who lives in Seaford in my constituency, who's got a very serious illness, and she's set herself the challenge of sailing around the UK by herself.
Wow.
Which is absolutely extraordinary. And if anyone wants to have a look at my Facebook page, you'll see I've posted the story on there, and she's raising money. So if anybody wants to have a look at that and contribute to her fund, that'd be absolutely fantastic. She's an absolutely inspirational person. I'm very keen to promote her and what she's doing, and hope that she hits her fundraising goals and achieves her dream of getting all the way around, which is certainly something to try and do.
Quiet riot. It's now time for everyone's favourite moment of the week, where Wokeaholic Alex scours the news to bring you the most outrageous instances of rage against the Enlightenment. It is, of course, time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey. Wokey Dokey.
Alex, spill the beans. What have you got for us?
So today's all about Britain's wokest roundabout.
Oh, wow.
Has it got an LGBT flag on it?
No. So this was all over, admittedly, the right-wing news, so maybe you won't have seen it, about 10 days ago, because it was about to open. But I thought, let's give it some time so that it does open and then we can get some reaction. So it was all over because it's a Dutch-style roundabout, which I think makes it, by definition, woke anyway. But so this is what it is, right? I mean, it's not that complicated a concept. People are going, it's so complicated, I couldn't work it out. All it is, imagine a circle round the roundabout. You get an inner ring, which is pedestrian crossings, and then an outer ring, which is cycling crossings. Cars approaching the roundabout have to let pedestrians and bicycles go through before they enter the roundabout. That's all it is.
If you can't figure that out, you shouldn't have a license.
I know. The only change, as I understand it, and I'm not a driver, but the only change, as I understand it, is that the cyclists also have to give priority to pedestrians. So it creates a kind of pecking order. Anyway, cue everyone, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, losing their minds over this. Utterly outrageous wokery. Then 4 or 5 days ago, it opened.
Where is it?
It's in Hemel Hempstead.
Okay.
And they've put it near a sort of industrial estate because they are about to build loads of housing around there. So they want to prepare the infrastructure. And of course, the criticism has been, no one lives here, no one cycles here. It makes sense to me to try this thing out where there's low traffic.
Of course, yeah.
Rather than just to put it in a place with loads of cyclists and pedestrians right off the bat. So loads of them are saying no one cycles here. Well, maybe because you take life in your hands. If you introduced a better system, people might cycle through here. So then it opened. So the Mail sent someone there to try and cycle round it. And the title of the piece is, I tried Britain's wokest roundabout and it nearly cost me my life. And all it is, right, is the woman is cycling towards the crossing. She sees a truck coming and there's loads of distance, right? We're talking nowhere near it.
Hundreds of meters.
And kind of hesitates, do I go for it? Then the truck passes and you hear her say, oh my goodness, I almost died. And it's like, what? Anyway.
Try cycling around London.
Oh no! Oh my god! Oh my gosh! Oh right. Oh no, I didn't like that. I thought I was going to be run over. That was absolutely awful. It felt weird that I had right of way. I didn't like that. And when the people were walking around, I felt a bit nervous. But then there was one lorry that didn't observe the rules. That was quite scary.
How have the Dutch survived this long? That's
I know.
what
How
with
have the
these-
Dutch
with these
survived
death
this
trap
long?
roundabouts everywhere?
Yeah.
Terrible.
So there you go. Roundabouts are woke this week.
Thank you, Alex. Listeners, you've been really good at sending us ideas for entrance.
And this
into
was
Wokey
actually
Dokey.
from a listener. So.
This was one of them. Keep them coming. quietriotpod@gmail.com. Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
Now, it's very hard to determine precisely when one ceases to have an uncomfortably warm frog and has instead frog consommé. It is even harder to decide when to admit despair is debilitating rather than empowering, but it must be acknowledged that the situation in the United States is now well into Gilead territory. In 1992, Bush deployed the National Guard in California during the LA riots at the request of Governor Pete Wilson and Mayor Tom Bradley. The three worked together to deal with the crisis. In 2006, his son, George W., decided not to deploy the troops after Hurricane Katrina when Louisiana Governor Kathleen Blanco objected. The last time the National Guard was deployed, despite the state governor objecting, was in March 1965 in Alabama, when President Lyndon B. Johnson, over the head of segregationist Governor George Wallace, in order to protect protesters walking from Selma to Montgomery to protest voter suppression that meant only 2% of the state's black population had been allowed to register to vote, after they were attacked by local law enforcement and KKK bosses. In stark contrast, Trump has deployed the National Guard to attack protesters demanding unlawful, according to most legal scholars, ICE immigration raids must stop. Most see this as an escalation. Trump is due to deploy Marines in LA on Wednesday, and mulling taking over the National Guard in other states where protests are spreading, and all of this ahead of a pretty North Korean-esque parade in Washington.
Have a full house tonight, as we always do here at our studio in Hollywood, which might be surprising for those of you in other parts of the country who have been watching cable news and believe this city is some kind of totalitarian hellscape right now. It most certainly is not. I just want to say thank God for President Trump and the heroes at ICE for protecting us from these bloodthirsty fruit stand vendors. I'm very angry, I have to say. I cannot believe what's going on. I knew it was going to be bad. I did not know it was going to be this bad. People who have lived here their whole lives, the vast majority of whom have never done anything wrong, are being abducted, which is the correct word to use. And to protest that, which is not only our right as Americans, it's our responsibility. Los Angelinos have been gathering to demonstrate, and with very few exceptions, peacefully demonstrate, to voice their opposition to this disgusting and unnecessary abuse of power instigated by our mentally ill president, who is dead set on exacerbating this. There's a riot outside, but that's not what you're seeing on TV. Someone sets a fire in a garbage can, 12 camera crews go running toward it. He so desperately wants to be the hero putting out fires. Putting out a fire you purposely start doesn't make you a firefighter. It makes you an arsonist with a hose, okay? It's so nuts. The President of the United States has been tougher on LA than on Russia. None of these doomsday scenarios the President and his minions keep imagining aloud it's not remotely true. There are no mobs, there's no violent insurrection. There are Americans who are upset, marching to protect their neighbors, no matter what this sick person says.
These are paid insurrectionists or agitators or troublemakers. You can call it whatever you want. But these are paid insurrectionists, and these are paid insurrectionists. These are paid troublemakers. These are paid troublemakers. But these are paid people in many cases. They get money. They're paid.
See, in that little mind, that sticky little brain covered with Aquanet, they would have to be paid, because why would anyone ever do anything without being paid? Right, Melania? I mean, that's how he thinks. Look, they're always going to be...
Naomi, shall we start with a little bit of basic information?
Sure.
Like, what is the National Guard? What is it meant to do? What is it there for?
So it is an integral component of the US military, and it's made up of, I think, probably about 500,000 personnel, most of whom serve part-time. They have private sector jobs, in the rest of their working week. And they have to commit to 1 weekend of training per month, plus a minimum of a few weeks service a year. Mm-hmm. So like a reserve kind of unit. And most people serve in the state that they live in. But the thing that marks the National Guard out from other parts of the military is that they're uniquely empowered to respond to state-level emergencies like natural disaster, like the COVID-19 pandemic response, etc. But they can also serve a domestic law enforcement role, and they can do missions overseas, and they have done that a bit more frequently in recent years.
Under the post.
Under the president's
a servant
direction.
With two masters, quite literally.
Well, yeah. And so if you've seen or heard of them before, it's probably been in response to a major hurricane,
the fires,
the fires in LA.
Objectively, the more federal forces and Trump get involved, the worse the situation in LA has got. There is now a curfew in LA. Where and how does this stop? James, would you like a go?
Well, what I'd start by saying is it's one of the most terrifying things I've seen genuinely in my lifetime. It's sort of something it is America staring into the abyss of genuinely some sort of civil war or dispute. I mean, you've got the governor of California. California is the fourth, fifth biggest economy in the world by itself. I mean, you're talking about a nation-sized state who is turning around and saying to the president of the country, I do not want you to send military personnel into our state. And he has been ignored. And the president of the United States has, in effect, sent a military detachment to take control of Los Angeles, which is, when you think about it, is actually really frightening. The National Guard is one thing if he does as he says he's going to do and sends in the Marines as well. That is an actual military operation at that point. How it ends, there are lots of ways it can end. It could end with, perhaps, people back down. But the fact is that the president has this agenda with these raids, and he's going to carry it out across the country. And what he's doing is he's sending a warning to everybody, every state, and he's saying, if you do not let me do what I want, I'm going to use the military to force you to do what I want.
But so here's the interesting bit. What if the unrest spreads in other cities, in California,
already,
for instance, or other states, but in a bigger way than it has so far? Does the president actually have the resources to? It seems to me that the plan kind of relies on singling out LA in a way, and that if others joined in saying no, he'd have a problem.
Yeah, the state governor has already said openly, I want my fellow governors to speak up and say that this isn't, because Trump's given himself a carte blanche here. He can do this anywhere. It's not unique to California. So there is a real danger that we see this spreading. And the very base of it is also that what he is doing is illegal.
Yeah.
These seizures, and we already had seen the terrible case of the guy who was sent to El Salvador and is now is back, I think, in America now, but was just wrongfully sent to a country where his human rights were not protected. What has happened, I've been saying this for quite a while, because in our political discourse, and I'm part of the foreign affairs team for the LibDems, so we've looked at the sort of global implications of Trump's policies, but I've been saying for quite a while to people, what he's doing domestically is going to be the most upsetting and frightening stuff he does, and we're starting to see that now. And I think these raids and the way in which he's conducting himself is like something out of a sort of dystopian.
It really
totally
is.
It's like a city under siege. A curfew. It's not solving anything. It is just going to deepen that sense of siege, and ultimately it'll stop when leadership chooses listening over domination. But with Trump, escalation is often the point, and creating the crisis that he will then come along and pretend he can fix. And you're right to mention the resources point, Alex. The protests have already spread to New York, Denver, Chicago, and that's going to really test the administration's capacity to keep responding simultaneously across multiple cities. And I guess the answer to your question is, legally, no, they can't really keep going with this. And logistically, probably only just. Because the guard is already stretched. They are deploying active duty militarily, domestically, and raising huge constitutional questions. And the public resistance is growing. Governors, mayors, and now even judges, I think, are beginning to push back. And if unrest spreads, the federal government is going to find itself fighting not just protesters, but the rule of federalism itself.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be about troops, but legitimacy.
Important to say that the state of California is now seeking to injunct the president from doing this. We may well have actually the decision by the time this airs, between recording this and this going out.
And Zia Youssef might have resigned again.
Yes, and unresigned again. Who knows? But it's one of those that I would be quite curious as to how the Supreme Court treated. Because even though they're super Trump friendly, the one area where they've kicked back.
They don't like the overreach.
Is the federal overreach over states. They really don't like that. So this will be
I think it's where it gets dicey. I think
it will be a hard one for them to resolve, I think.
Look, you're right. They've shown themselves to be much more deferential to executive power in recent years, but this is different because it is striking at the heart of federalism. And if they let him override state autonomy in policing and set this dangerous precedent, I think they know that the public is watching very, very, very closely, and it may just come down to Roberts again trying to protect the court's credibility as much as the Constitution.
Difficult question for you both. Does Trump have a point? This is a policy on which he was elected. He's trying to implement it, and the states are saying, we don't care. Does he have a point in trying to enforce this? Or is there a reverse correlation with him overusing executive orders to mandate stuff and people thinking this has no democratic legitimacy? It hasn't gone through Congress. It's basically what you wake up feeling like every morning. So why, what exactly makes that the law?
When people see power being wielded by decree via executive order without public and parliamentary scrutiny, they will begin to question the very premise of democratic consent. And you're saying that can work both ways, that if you voted for Trump and you voted for the deportations, then nothing should stand in the way of that. But the message that he is putting forward is the law is what the president says the law is, not what the law actually is.
Yeah.
And so it's no surprise that people are now beginning to ask why they should respect laws that didn't go through a democratic process. And unrest tends to thrive in a vacuum of legitimacy, and Trump helped create that. He is going about it in such an appallingly awful, frightening, totalitarian way that even if he did legitimately have the mandate to be doing this stuff, he is so lacking in the diplomatic skills to do it elegantly and bring people along with him that I think it will ultimately really hurt him, but maybe not for quite a while.
The executive order stuff thing is really important. I mean, the US system was designed to prevent kings. It was literally a repudiation of monarchy, specifically our monarchy, but monarchies generally. And what Trump is doing is he's basically stretching this system and those checks and balances to breaking point now with this use. And I think the wider point here is the way Donald Trump's worldview, the leaders he admires, and he's been, he tries to hide it, but he says it over and over again. It's Xi, it's Putin, people who have manufactured conflict in order to legitimize their own or firm up their own power base. And, whether it's, Xi persecuting the Uyghurs or it's Putin with his illegal war in Ukraine. These are things that, Trump admires that, might is right. I have power and therefore I should be able to do what I want. And if you don't agree with me, I will force you to do it. And that manufactured conflict means that he's always in this position where what it looks to me like he's trying to do is split the American public constantly and say, as long as I've got roughly half of them on side, I'm always going to win an election with that. Yeah. And so that's enough, and it doesn't matter if the rest of them hate me. But that fundamentally undermines democracy, because a government should always try to govern for everybody if it can, not just for a minority of people who support their party.
It's interesting because I think it's a corporate view of, and actually quite an old-fashioned corporate view. So it's not even as companies behave today. It's, the way you think tycoons in the 30s behaved. And I think that's what he admires about Xi and Putin and people like that, they want X to happen and it happens. And people like that see the democratic process as a sort of inconvenience. Interesting, Trump's popularity has gone down significantly since this deployment. So his net rating is down 5 points and 6 points in 2A-rated polls in the last few days. And on the specific issue, it's even worse. So deploying National Guard, 45% disapprove versus 38 approve. And deploying Marines, 47-34. So is there a possibility that maybe the unpopularity of doing it is the safety valve that makes him back down?
Quiet riot. Quiet riot.
You've been criticized for having a double standard with the president pardoning all these people who attacked police officers on January 6th in his first day in office. How do you answer that criticism?
Well, this is very different. These are people out there hurting people in California right now. This is ongoing, no longer. We're going to protect them. We're going to do everything we can to prosecute violent criminals in California. California is burning.
Dare I ask? I mean, a question that would sound ridiculous about anyone 10 years ago. Is he actually trying to force a situation where he declares some sort of martial law and cancels the midterms?
I mean, that's just not even a paranoid question anymore.
Exactly.
It's a plausible strategic aim. Trump thrives in crisis, and martial law would give him maximum control, minimum accountability, and whether he could get away with it constitutionally is unclear to me as somebody not expert in the US Constitution, but he is, as James said, testing the limits at every step of the way, and he might not need full martial law, but just enough chaos to claim only he can restore order. And we all know that is the authoritarian playbook, and he is reading it very, very closely.
Yeah, that would be the absolute textbook way of doing it. I mean, in the American system, of course, unlike here, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, and therefore has, it's very interesting because if he were to order the troops onto the streets, obviously the commanders have a decision to make at that point. And obviously if judges then say this is an illegitimate order, that puts an extraordinary position for the top brass of the US military have to make a huge call at that point. Do we defy the commander-in-chief and go along with the courts, or do we, follow orders and go and essentially suppress the US population, a position I imagine none of them thought they would ever be put in their careers. So it's an extraordinary position that and I think your point, Naomi, is right, though, what you said, that we are now having to, what was an unthinkable thing not very long ago now, all things are thinkable all of a sudden, and that's what he's done to American politics and to world politics, is the tariff stuff. I'm not an expert in economics, but we all know tariffs are self-defeating, right? They damage the country that's imposing the tariffs. America is a central part of the global trade system. No one in their right mind would introduce tariffs. He just went ahead and did it. And now it's like, well, what else could he do? Where are the limits for this guy? And I'm not sure where they are, and I'm not sure who's around him advise who he's listening to at the moment, and those people are possibly even more dangerous in their way.
Well, I mean, if you take the view, which again would have been considered ridiculous a few years ago, but if you do take the view that this is influence of outside forces that would quite like to fray the federal fabric of America and weaken America, then this is terrific. Right? America has never been weaker internationally in many ways.
And it's the same thing that's happened in Europe.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen in the midterms? Do you think this is going to motivate people to turn out and vote against the Republicans? Or
I mean, I have to say, I think there are, because America is such a vast place, and everyone I ever speak to about American politics, the first thing they say is, you have to understand how huge a country it is, how different states are, how different even counties within states are. So there will be some states that see California as the sort of the poster boy of liberal America, and will love this being done to them, right? And that might make him very popular there. But on the whole, I look at those polling numbers, and what it says to me is that even a slice of people who maybe slightly hesitantly supported him are beginning to peel off and think that we need to put the brakes on this guy.
Yeah.
And so I think it's setting him up to do very, very poorly in the midterms. And by the way, setting Gavin Newsom up fantastically for the Democratic primary. I mean, if he ends up being the guy that came...
Say it properly, though.
Gavin Newsom. I mean, what the fuck? Even that,
it's just so embarrassing.
How old are you? How old are you to be making up nicknames?
He always does that. It's pathetic.
So, yeah, I think it's setting him up magnificently for a run at the Democratic primary. Can we explore one tiny tributary before we get off the topic, which is Elon Musk's knee bending seems to be now complete. He's now apologizing on his own fucking social media platform. He's apologizing, let me say that again, on his own social media platform for going too far. Is he becoming a cautionary tale for rich people who want to get very actively involved in politics? I mean, he's been shafted in every way imaginable.
He has, and this is just humiliating. He came to the realization that I think everybody else came to earlier, which is that Trump has a lot more weapons to hurt him with than he has the other way around. To be quite frank, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are. He's the president of the United States.
You can't algorithm your way through governing.
Yeah, there's just it's a different thing altogether. I mean, I think the rich people getting involved in politics is really interesting. I mean, wealthy Americans have got involved in politics before, and we've had it here as well. But for the most part, most wealthy people deliberately do not get involved in politics because of exactly what's happened to Musk. I mean, you are pinning your colours to an individual, and it can hurt your business really badly. And we've seen it with various people, and unless you're looking to go the way of, someone like Bidzina Ivanishvili in Georgia and actually take over the country, you are running the risk of harming your business interests, harming your reputation as a business person, and ending up, as Musk has, humiliating yourself, quite frankly, which is what he's done. So I think it does act as a cautionary tale in some ways, but on the other hand, Trump is trying to create a system that he's got these wealthy people bending the knee to him, and funding his campaigns, and helping him to subvert the system. And he's had a lot of help from Musk so far, and there are others out there. And the likes of Bezos and Zuckerberg, I'm afraid, are nearly as bad, as they're sitting there pointing their fingers at immigrants and blaming them for America's problems with inequality, and while they're sitting on more money than anyone has ever had in history, and that is pretty obscene in its way.
And all three of them from immigrant stock.
Yeah.
I mean, which is just, everyone
Why
in
aren't you a
America.
multi-billionaire, Alex?
I've got a call to action, and then I think you will see us out. There are several, actually, immigration charities in California that you can support from abroad. The California Immigrant Policy Center is a good one. I will put 2 or 3 links in the show notes to places where you can, if you don't have money, you can actually volunteer time. If you speak an unusual language, you can translate for them. You can do data entry for them from home. There are loads of ways to
Or
contribute.
Spanish, presumably.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure that's the language they're short on.
Okay.
but yes. But the point is, you can volunteer your time remotely in several ways, and it seems to me quite a good way for even psychologically, to make them feel supported by the international community. Suddenly they get an influx of people saying, we want to help. You're not alone.
You're not alone. And I have been rereading some Martin Luther King this week in the light of everything that's been happening. I don't know if listeners have been on a Zoom call with Alex and I, where I've been in my living room, where I've got him stuck up on the wall behind me as a daily reminder. But I want to just read, I think, quite a apposite quote from his 1955 Montgomery bus boycott speech. The only weapon that we have in our hands this evening is the weapon of protest. That's all. And certainly this is the glory of America with all its faults. This is the glory of our democracy. If we were incarcerated behind the iron curtains of a communistic nation, we couldn't do this. If we were dropped in the dungeon of a totalitarian regime, we couldn't do this. But the great glory of American democracy is the right to protest for right. Quiet riot.
And now it's time for certainly my favourite part of the show. It's time for Naomi to bring us a slice of good news. It's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. Do-de-o-do-lo, I want good news.
What have you got for us, Naomi?
All right, you two. Apart from Farage when he takes a call from Trump, what's the hardest substance on earth?
Oh my God!
So gross.
Come on, what's the hardest substance? We know.
Diamond?
Yeah, right? Diamonds.
Forever.
All right, Shirley. An invention from here in the UK features diamonds in the first ever application of gemstone battery technology. Promising to last thousands of years, the microwatt power sources are seen as the perfect solution to devices in environments where neither changing batteries nor carrying around extras are an option. And it's been developed by the University of Bristol in partnership with the UK Atomic Energy Authority. And the battery contains a radioactive isotope of carbon called carbon-14. And isotopes are forms of chemical elements with the same number of protons but a different number of neutrons. So some are stable, but those that aren't are radioactive and emit radiation as they decay. In the battery, the radioactive carbon-14 isotope is encased inside the shell of a diamond. And as we all know, the hardest substance known to man, apart from Farage on the phone to Trump.
Naturally occurring, I should say, because there are some synthetic things now that are
I thought you meant
carbon, boron, nitride or something. I remember reading something that we can now create things that are...
I thought you meant synthetic insofar as...
No,
can
you please just stop going there?
Okay, look, anyway, the director of the project has said that diamond batteries offer a safe, sustainable way to provide a continuous microwatt level of power. They're emerging technology that use a manufactured diamond to safely encase small amounts of carbon-14. And electricity via the battery is generated in a really similar way to solar panels that we talked about earlier. It has a half-life of about 5,500 years. Like, it's a really, really long time. And so...
They really are forever.
Right, exactly. Several thousand years before the diamond Duracell bunny inside would tire out, making it ideal for things like spacecraft, satellites, which can't undergo maintenance easily, or in medical devices like pacemakers. You don't want to have to be going in and out with somebody to update the battery on that. So diamonds to the rescue. It's not a link to an article this time, it's a link to a YouTube video, because obviously we've got to do our bit to keep the UK number one in the YouTube consumption charts. But yeah, I thought that was a slightly different but nice story.
Thank you. We'll drop that in the show notes for people to watch rather than read and share.
And that's all we've got time for today. Our huge thanks to James McCleary.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Remember, every bit of content we put out free to everyone at the same time. And the only reason we can do that is the generosity of people who fund that philosophy. You can do so from £5 a month at ko-fi.com/quietriotpod.
We'll be back on Sunday with a review of the week, which might need to include the breaking news that's happened while we've been in the studio.
Which is?
Gibraltar and the EU and the UK have done the deal.
Yeah.
So a bit like when you go to St Pancras and you can clear French border, you'll be able to do that between the UK and Gibraltar.
Yeah, they were getting very close on Monday.
Yep. But we'll be back also next week with that deep dive on the spending review we told you about earlier with economist Vicky Price.
Until then, remember how much we cherish and appreciate you. Big hug and bye.
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 Quite Right is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
We kept to time. Miracle of miracles.